Carl Jung inspires us to understand that the true process of inner healing begins at the very moment we make the courageous decision to put ourselves first. In a world where we are constantly encouraged to seek external recognition, to fit into imposed molds and to live up to the expectations of others, we often forget to look inward. We rarely stop to reflect, what do I really want? What makes me feel whole and at peace? The answer to these questions does not lie in the opinion of third parties, nor in the approval coming from outside. It dwells in the silence of the soul, in the intimate connection with our essence. Giving priority to oneself is not an act of selfishness. On the contrary, it is a sign of emotional maturity. It is recognizing that the most important person in your life is you. Jung warned that many emotional wounds arise precisely from disconnection with what we really are. We spend a good part of our lives shaping ourselves to meet the desires of others, parents, partners, society, until one day we no longer recognize who we really are. Everything we avoid facing, everything we repress within ourselves, does not disappear. These renegade parts of our personality turn into shadows that sooner or later emerge to the surface. Whether through relationships that repeat themselves with the same toxic patterns, or in self-sabotaging attitudes or in a constant sense of emptiness and frustration, what is not healed manifests itself in other ways. We ask ourselves, why do things never change? Why does it seem that we live trapped in the same conflicts? The answer, most of the time, is not in the outside world, but in the inner universe that we have neglected for so long. Jung showed us that the beginning of true change lies in the willingness to explore one's own soul, to listen honestly. Imagine that your life is a direct reflection of your internal state. If you find yourself constantly surrounded by people who don't respect you, if you live exhausted by draining relationships or situations that sap your energy, this is not a mere coincidence. It's your unconscious trying to alert you that there's something inside you that needs attention and care. But, are you willing to listen? Most avoid this internal confrontation, as it requires courage. It means facing one's own traumas, insecurities, regrets, and recognizing that we are often the ones who perpetuate the pain. However, it is exactly at this moment that the possibility of true transformation lies. By prioritizing yourself, you begin to realize that it is impossible to heal yourself by staying in environments that continue to hurt you. Healing doesn't happen when you insist on repeating the same cycles. It only manifests itself when you interrupt patterns and choose the new one. The process of individuation, so emphasized by Jung, consists of freeing oneself from the need for external approval in order to finally find one's authentic identity. This does not mean isolating oneself from the world, but rather ceasing to depend on it to define oneself. How many times have you believed that your happiness was in someone's hands? How many times have you stopped acting for fear of being rejected? From the moment you put yourself first, something inside you changes. You stop accepting emotional crumbs, stop trying to fill your voids with the presence of others, and understand that what you need most is a true connection with yourself. And that's where the cure reveals itself without resistance. Toxic relationships begin to dissipate. Environments that once caused anxiety no longer have the same impact. Not because everything around you has changed, but because you have changed. You have stopped looking outside for what has always existed inside you. It is at this point that genuine freedom is born, the one that comes from realizing that your peace and well-being are your responsibility. But it is worth remembering, this journey requires courage. Learning to say no, setting healthy boundaries, listening to your intuition, all of this is challenging. How many times have you ignored your feelings for fear of disappointing someone? How many times have you sacrificed your serenity to please? According to Jung, the cost of neglecting ourselves is high. We pay with anxiety, with the feeling of being lost, living an existence that does not belong to us. However, when deciding to prioritize oneself, a curious phenomenon happens. The world seems less chaotic, bonds are no longer emotional battles, and suffering loses strength. Emotional healing is not an end destination, but a daily practice. It is the act of choosing oneself continuously, without guilt. It is the persistence in staying true to oneself, even in the face of criticism or misunderstanding. And when this becomes a habit, everything changes. Life gains new colors, not because the world has changed, but because you have come to see it with the eyes of those who finally recognize themselves as deserving of peace, love, and truth. When you begin to put yourself in the foreground, something profound is activated within you. Consciousness begins to emerge. Suddenly, you start to see aspects of your life that previously remained hidden. Relationships that only worked because you were the one who made all the effort. Situations where you gave yourself too much, even without receiving reciprocity. Moments when he endured the unbearable out of sheer fear of being alone. When choosing, a rupture occurs. It is as if an old layer has broken through to give way to the light of self-awareness. Jung taught us that everything that is repressed does not disappear, it just hides. And when we deny our needs, values, and limits, the world around us begins to mirror that denial. If we don't recognize our worth, we will attract people who disregard it. If we don't face our pains, life will take care of repeating them until we are ready to look them in the face. This is why so many people remain trapped in vicious circles, not out of bad luck, but out of fear of confronting each other. Many times, we call love what, deep down, is attachment. We believe that we have true friendships, when in reality they are connections sustained by convenience. And too often, our choices are motivated not by freedom but by fear, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being left behind. When you choose yourself, you stop bargaining with your own peace. Stop sustaining what no longer has life. And then, inevitably, it loses people. Not because you have become someone different, but because you no longer tolerate what you previously accepted in silence. Some ties unravel without explanation. People who seemed essential begin to move away. At first, it feels like a loss. But in time, you will realize that it was liberation. Each space that opens up with these exits allows the arrival of the new, the true, what is really aligned with your evolution. This process, while vital, is not easy. The human unconscious resists change. He prefers familiar pain to the uncertain unknown. Therefore, it is common to see people staying in harmful relationships, in jobs that drain their soul, just because they are already used to it. But it is precisely at this point that healing begins, when we have the courage to let go. Letting go doesn't mean erasing memories or pretending nothing hurt. It means accepting that we can't force anyone to stay, that it's not up to us to convince someone of our worth. The only well-being over which we have real control is our own. From then on, the world is divided into two paths, that of those who continue to look outside for what they can only find inside, and that of those who decide to dive into their own soul. Jung said that the path to wholeness is arduous, but it is the only one that is worth it. It is the path of authenticity, of inner truth. As you prioritize yourself, you begin to notice a powerful change, your relationships transform. Those who were around just for convenience move away. In its place, people arrive who truly value its essence. Relationships where there is exchange, listening, mutual support, no more unilateral sacrifices. This only happens because, by valuing yourself, you stop accepting less than you deserve. And while this process may seem painful, it is profoundly liberating. It forces us to face an uncomfortable truth, that many of the dynamics we have maintained have been self-powered. It is easier to hold others accountable. To say that the problem is out there. But Jung reminds us, everything we experience is a reflection of our internal world. And as long as we don't do the work of healing from within, we will continue to be trapped in the same stories. Here comes an essential concept, the shadow. Jung stated that we all carry within us aspects that we prefer not to see, fears, desires, fragilities, insecurities. Elements that we repressed because we were taught that they were wrong, shameful, or unacceptable. However, ignoring our shadow does not make it disappear. On the contrary, it gains strength. It hides in the relationships we choose, in the disproportionate reactions, in the emotions we can't control. The shadow acts silently, until we decide to face it. When you put yourself as a priority, you become more aware of your own shadow. You begin to recognize your patterns, identify times when you said yes, meaning no, and notice how you have often sabotaged yourself. And it is at this moment that a bifurcation opens: continue acting on autopilot or take charge of one's own life. Many give up at this point, because facing oneself is uncomfortable. It implies admitting that we accept less than we deserved, that we hurt ourselves trying to please, that we diminish ourselves for fear of rejection. But there is a non-negotiable truth: the pain of facing reality is fleeting. The pain of living denying oneself can last a lifetime. True healing begins when we look at ourselves sincerely. No judgment. No masks. With compassion. Jung said that we cannot transform what we do not recognize. Change begins when we allow ourselves to see, and accept, who we really are. It is in this act of courage that everything is transformed. When we stop blaming the world and start assuming our power. When we understand that we are co-creators of reality and that every decision counts. When we realize that we don't need anyone's permission to live our truth. From there, everything aligns. We begin to attract people and experiences that resonate with this new state of consciousness. We no longer seek to fit in where we don't belong. Anxiety for the future dissolves, as we trust in our ability to walk with integrity. But the most beautiful of all is the serenity that is born from this process. An inner peace that does not depend on external circumstances. A deep feeling of being at home, inside yourself. And that, in itself, is a cure. By prioritizing yourself, you start to notice patterns that were previously hidden. Life ceases to seem like a random sequence of events and begins to reveal itself as a mirror of your own consciousness. Jung said that everything we see in the other, whether what we admire or what we reject, is often a reflection of parts of ourselves that we have not yet integrated. The principle of projection reminds us that external relations are actually invitations to look deeper within. If you constantly find yourself in situations where you need to prove yourself, maybe there's still a part of you that believes it's not enough. If you attract relationships where you are little valued, it may be because, internally, you still do not recognize yourself completely. And that is why the true cure is not in changing the other, but in transforming the relationship you have with yourself. When this inner work begins, something extraordinary happens. Anxiety about the future decreases, because you come to trust your own ability to navigate life consciously. Relationships cease to be a source of suffering and become a space for mutual growth. And most of all, you get your power back. This does not mean that everything will be perfect, that fear will disappear completely, or that insecurities will cease to exist. It does mean that you will develop the tools to not allow these emotions to govern your choices. You will stop acting out of lack and start acting out of abundance. Instead of desperately searching for love, you'll realize that it's always been inside of you. Jung taught that the goal of life is not to eliminate pain, but to learn to integrate it. That true healing does not occur through fleeing from wounds, but by welcoming and re-signifying them. When we allow ourselves to do this, we stop living in the past and worrying excessively about the future. We come to inhabit the present, the only moment where life really happens. It is in this now that we find peace. Not because of the absence of problems, but because of the certainty that, regardless of what comes, we will be able to sustain our integrity. Not because we are perfect, but because we have become aware of who we are. Because, finally, we understand that we are enough just as we are. This is the greatest gift to prioritize, not only to recover time, energy, and balance, but also to rescue something even more valuable: authenticity. When you stop being what the world expects and start being who you really are, healing manifests naturally, without resistance. Life becomes the reflection of your deepest truth. And in making that choice, you understand that much of the suffering you carried didn't come from the world around you, but from the stories you told yourself. Stories that said that, to be loved, you had to try harder. That in order to be accepted, it was necessary to fit in. That in order to be valued, it was mandatory to prove one's worth at all times. But when these beliefs begin to be questioned, everything changes. You realize that it was never your responsibility to carry burdens that did not belong to you. Jung reminds us that we inherit beliefs and patterns from the collective unconscious, ideas about success, sacrifice, loyalty, and love that are rarely questioned. And so, we keep repeating narratives that don't even represent us. Perhaps you have learned, from an early age, that love is synonymous with renunciation. That to be strong you have to endure everything in silence. That resting is a sign of laziness. And that's why she feels guilty every time she tries to take care of herself. But these ideas are not immutable laws. They are just conditionings, and you can choose new paths. You are not doomed to repeat the same cycles over and over again. Jung said that destiny is not something fixed, but the result of our consciousness in action. By expanding this awareness, you transform not only your reality, but also your ability to make choices that are more aligned with who you really are. When you put yourself first, you understand that love doesn't have to be war. That peace is not utopia. That happiness should not depend on external factors. And that its value is intrinsic, it doesn't need to be proven or justified. By recognizing this, you begin to free yourself from the bonds that once bound you. People who once had power over you lose the power to manipulate. Situations that previously generated suffering cease to shake. Not because the world has changed, but because you have changed the way you relate to it. You stop seeking approval from those who have never tried to understand you. Stop insisting on staying where there is clearly no room for you anymore. This is the freedom that heals, not the one that preaches, do what you want, without consequences, but the internal freedom of not needing anything external to feel complete. The security of being alone and, even so, feeling whole. The certainty that, whatever happens, you will be okay, because you have learned to be with yourself. Jung stated that individuation is the most essential process of human existence. It is a matter of bringing together the fragmented parts of the being, lights, shadows, pains, gifts, and integrating them into a true whole. This process, although full of losses and silences, is also what gives real meaning to life. By leaving behind the versions of yourself created only to please others, life presents you with the new. New people emerge. New possibilities are revealed. And, above all, a peace is born that previously seemed unattainable. Not because everything was perfect, but because the internal war ceased. At that point, you no longer live to please, nor to survive. You live to create, to feel, to share. Live with courage. With presence. With integrity. But the work doesn't end here. Consciousness is like a muscle, it needs to be exercised, fed, cared for. The world will continue to try to pull you into old dynamics. But now you know, your peace is priceless. The only decisions that really matter are the ones that bring you closer to yourself. Because when you change, everything changes. Relations improve. Opportunities expand. Life responds with generosity. Jung said that the unconscious responds to our deepest beliefs. When you fully believe that you deserve the best, life itself takes care of showing you that. And the only question that remains is, are you ready to welcome this new reality? If the answer is yes, know that you will not be alone. There are many walking this path, in silence, in courage, in truth. Because when you choose yourself, the whole universe begins to conspire in your favor. When you value yourself, life shows you that you also value yourself. And when you let go, healing flows, without obstacles, without barriers, as it always should have been.